Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Monomyth Diaries, a podcast where ordinary people get to share their hero's journey. I'm Mandi.
And I'm Karen, and we'll be your hosts.
We'll discover powerful insights, critical moments of growth, and much more.
Thanks for joining us. We all have a monomyth to share, and someone out there needs to hear it. Welcome back to the Monomyth Diaries, where it's a take what you like and leave the rest podcast.
So, Karen, recently I have had some people approach me and ask me questions about Al-Anon, so I thought perhaps we'd talk about it. If you haven't had an opportunity to listen to my monomyth, I tell my story in episodes 1, 2, and 3, and I talk a lot about Al-Anon because it was a huge part of my story, but we didn't really go into what Al-Anon is, so that's what we're going to talk about today.
So, Mandi, what is Al-Anon?
Al-Anon is a program for people whose lives have been affected by someone else's drinking. It's the sister program of AA, so we do the same 12 steps. And the way that I think about Al-Anon is if your life has been affected by someone else's drinking, it's a great program for you. If you think about AA, you have one problem drinker. So for example, in my family, let's say it was my dad. It was my dad and my mom, but we'll keep my dad for simplicity's sake. You also then have my mom and myself and my 2 siblings orbiting my dad. All 4 of our lives were affected by my dad's drinking. So all 4 of us could benefit from Al-Anon. So there's more people affected by someone else's drinking than the actual drinker.
So it's like a program to support the 4 of you who was dealing with the actions of one person.
Correct. I took those effects of my dad's drinking and my mom's drinking into my adulthood unknowingly. It helps people mitigate those effects. We learn tools and how to deal with life.
So how did you hear about Al-Anon in the first place?
As I said, if you listen to my monomyth, you'll learn the story about how a friend of mine had been in program for a long time and realized that I had some characteristics of somebody who grew up in active alcoholism. And at the time, I was actually married to my first husband, who also had some addiction issues. So I had my mom, my dad, and my ex-husband. I guess what we call our qualifier, but really in the end, I am my own qualifier because those effects were so ingrained in me.
Wow.
For example, when there were problems in my house, nobody talked about them. It was like we walked around the elephant in the room. We didn't learn any tools for solving conflict without screaming and yelling at one another or just not talking to someone at all.
And it sounds like, because there was this pattern, mom, dad, and then first husband, it was what was normal for you, would you say?
Yeah. We talked about that too in Sarah's episode where she talked about, I saw all of these things that my mom and dad were doing and I said I would never do those things. And then I just took them right with me into my adulthood. As Donnell even said, he just packed his suitcase and took it with him.
It's familiar. It's almost in a bizarre way to say it's comfortable.
Circling back around to Cindy's episode where she said you attract those people that are similar to you.
Talking about your involvement with Al-Anon, how long have you been involved?
I have been in Al-Anon for 20 years.
Oh my goodness, 20 years.
20 years.
What were you thinking, the first time, like you said in your monomyth, a woman named Diane, who would later become your sponsor, invited you to your first meeting? What was your first impression?
Well, there was a lot of peace and serenity in the room. People were happy. Which I wasn't. And I couldn't understand why people were happy. That they were dealing with all of these problems, how they could be happy, because I didn't understand. My life had become so unmanageable and so out of control, and I was so sad and desperate, and they were there and happy. So that was strange. But at the same time, it was a little bit of a relief.
Right.
But also anxiety producing because it's all new and unfamiliar and uncomfortable for people to be talking about their problems so openly.
That must have been like big culture shock?
Yeah, it was definitely culture shock for sure. Just something I was so unfamiliar with. We didn't talk feelings in my house.
So I know we covered this in another Monomyth Diaries short, but I think it's worth bringing it up here, especially for those who are listening to this for the first time.
Yeah.
Our tagline, take what you like and leave the rest. I know this was something that you brought to the podcast, and you said it came from Al-Anon. Do you want to share about that background?
Sure. And again, we did talk about this a little bit in another episode, but the idea of take what you like and leave the rest comes from the meetings that I attend. There's tons and tons of different kinds of Al-Anon meetings that you could go to, and most of the meetings, they will say that tagline. It's a safe place for people to share It's judgment free. You're taking what you like and leaving the rest, because you're not going to get everything all at one time. So you take what you need that day and don't be judgmental about the rest of it. And maybe it'll mean something to you later.
Which I kind of feel also describes the environment we hope to cultivate in not just our podcast, but I feel in also our daily lives as well. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting how this is something you took from Al-Anon, that you're applying it in so many different places. And so what would you say are some common misconceptions about Al-Anon? And if you don't mind me asking, when you first started going to Al-Anon, did you carry any of those misconceptions?
I most certainly did carry some misconceptions. One, I thought when I got there, it wouldn't be forever. This is not a program that you graduate from. And I was really upset that I felt I was being punished for having to be there. I'm not the drinker. I'm not the problem. Why do I have to be here? But I really was my own problem because I was so hyper-focused on the people around me that were misbehaving or drinking that I wasn't looking at myself. I was doing a lot of blaming. If he would just do X, Y, Z, then I could be happy. But that's not true. I have to do what I need to do in order to make myself happy. I think the other misconception was I thought I was going to go there and learn how to get my ex-husband to behave. I thought that those people were going to teach me how to get him in line and how to manage my parents. And that wasn't the case at all. We're there to focus on ourselves and to learn to deal with life in a better way, learn tools to manage life and to be happy and serene, whether the people around us were drinking or not.
Can you take me through that emotional journey from you went in going okay, Al-Anon, this is for people, to support group for people who are dealing with someone who's drinking and, all those effects, this is going to solve everything in my life, to the point where you finally accepted, this is about working on yourself and not about them. Can you share with us, what did that feel like for you? Because I don't imagine that happened right away.
So it definitely wasn't an overnight process. We have this phrase, keep coming back, it works if you work it. And you just have to keep plugging away. They also say fake it till you make it a lot.
Okay.
You have to keep coming, keep learning, keep working on yourself. And slowly, for me, it was very, very slowly, as time went on, as I went to meetings, as I met new people, became friends with other people in program, worked with my sponsor, my barriers started to come down. I started to learn tools and put tools in my toolbox to handle situations differently. But it took me years. I know I didn't speak in meetings for the first 2 years to anybody except my sponsor. I was just a totally different person. Yeah, so it's a long journey, I'm not gonna lie. Working on yourself, especially when you're raised with it the way that I was, it's difficult to undo some of those traumatic experiences and the way that you handle them.
I gotta ask you, what kept bringing you back? To use an analogy, I think it was working out. New Year's Day, everyone signs up for the gym, but usually by February, they're gone. To me, I feel like the emotional work is much more challenging than a physical workout. And what brought you back? What got you to push through?
That is such a good question. And I think Donnell said it really well in his episode. So if you haven't listened to Donnell's, I highly recommend his too. He talks about he's a miracle. Being able to say you're a miracle. I can say that I'm a miracle today. 20 years ago, I couldn't have said that. But I could see the miracles in the room. When other people who had been in program shared where they started to where they were, that's what I wanted. I wanted what they had. I wanted their peace. I wanted their serenity. I wanted their conflict resolutions. I wanted their self-esteem. I wanted a happy marriage and good friendships. And they had those things, and they would share about how they came into the rooms of Al-Anon versus where they were today. And to see that transformation was amazing. And that's what kept me going, was I wanted what they had. I needed to borrow their miracles.
Oh, I love that phrase. So what were some of your biggest takeaways from this? And how many years did you do this? Have you been doing this for?
20.
What were some of your takeaways?
Well, gosh, I'm still learning and still growing. I will always be learning and always growing. One of my biggest takeaways was learning to have personal growth and to do introspect, because I grew up in a family that's not something we ever talked about. And that's huge, to be able to look at myself and say, this is what I'm doing, and maybe this is what I need to be doing differently, or this is where I want to get to. I'm able to now look at my part in situations where there's conflict and say, what was my part? Do I owe somebody an apology? What did I do wrong? What am I going to do different next time? It's just given me so many tools. When I'm in a situation, just to pause. Something so simple that I didn't know. No one in my family paused. They just started yelling. My family of origin, it was whoever could yell the loudest or be the quietest. In my case, I just would learn to just be quiet, keep my mouth shut. And I lost my voice through all of that. I didn't, ever stand up for myself or speak my truth. And I've learned to do that.
I'm still processing over what you shared about how, like, one of the biggest things was, you walked in thinking like, okay, if you just fix, my mom, my dad, or my first husband, everything will be fine. And then having to go through and go, oh no, this isn't about them. This is about me. Mm-hmm. I imagine there was a lot of emotion. Like, I mean, if I'm putting myself in your shoes, and I think about how, that kind of scenarios happened in my life. For me, it was when I first started going to church, and I was like, oh, my mom and my family needs this, and I had to start to learn, like, this isn't about them. This is about changing me and changing how I respond to whatever they're doing. And not, I needed to take ownership, as you're saying, accountability for my actions, my decisions, and my choice. And I thought about how angry I was. I remember when someone told me that, I was furious, but I just remember there was so much anger until I finally got that lesson. I can only imagine going to, like, Al-Anon, where, it's easy to point the finger at, like, this person's drinking. This person's drinking is out of control. And then having to go, like, no, I need to work on me.
But I want to circle back. You said something that was so interesting, about being angry. And I think I was so angry when I got to Al-Anon. I was very, very angry.
I'd be furious. Yeah. I'd be like, what am I here for? I'm not the problem.
I know at one point someone said, my dad didn't get up every day and look in the mirror and say, I'm going to get drunk and beat my kids. He never did that. And it gave me so much compassion for him that I could let go some of that anger over time. And I know we talked a little bit about in the other episode about detaching with love. And I was able to detach with love from the disease. Mm-hmm. I could love my dad and hate the disease. He didn't want to be an alcoholic. He didn't want to be that way. But I'm sure in his history, something happened to him, or maybe, one of his parents was an alcoholic as well. I don't know. He was doing the best he could with the tools that he had, just like I was. So I was able to let go of that anger. Being resentful, it's like drinking poison and hoping someone else dies, and I was slowly poisoning myself with all that anger and all that resentment. Man, I can't say enough about how much Al-Anon saved my life and changed the trajectory of my life. I don't know where I would be without it.
So how did Al-Anon, beyond the compassion, help you to be able to let that go, to release the resentment? Because I think that's one of the most difficult things to do. And we hear stories of people whose loved ones or someone they know who went to the grave still holding on to that resentment. So you mind sharing how you were able to do that?
I think it's through forgiveness for me. Forgiveness is for me, not for the other person. Right. Really, it's all about forgiveness. I can't, my dad didn't do it purposely. How can I be mad at him for that? Mm-hmm. Neither did my ex-husband, neither did my mom, that none of them were doing it to me. Not on purpose.
And you learned this from the testimonials of Al-Anon participants?
Oh, yes. Yes. So in the meetings, everybody shares, their own stories and their own journeys. And listening to those people share their testimonials, as you would say. For example, I used to go to open AA meetings, even though I wasn't the alcoholic, so that I could learn to have compassion for those people. They don't want to be that way, and they can't help it. It's a disease. Being an Al-Anon helped me understand that it is a disease. It is a family disease that affects entire families and generations.
I can imagine, as I think about, like, when we talk about alcoholism as an addiction to alcohol, addiction can have so many different faces. Mm-hmm. Like, it doesn't necessarily have to be about alcohol. I have people in my family, it's retail therapy, it is codependence, it is like an addiction to relationships, it is food or addiction to control or work or making money.
Yeah, and I know we talked about this in mainstream media today. We're starting to see more people talk openly about addiction problems in AA. We don't so much hear about Al-Anon. You know, you're hearing a little bit more about it. But there's also other programs, like you said, there's Gamblers Anonymous, there's Sex and Love Anonymous, there's Overeaters Anonymous, there's Narcotics Anonymous. I mean, there's a ton of different 12-step programs out there to help people with these kinds of problems.
So you said that, earlier you just said that you thought it was going to be like a one and done thing. You're showing up, maybe take a few workshops, you're going to learn some things, you can go home and everything's going to be hunky-dory. But here you are, over 20 years later, you're still attending regularly. Can you share why?
As I said, there's a phrase that we use, keep coming back, because sometimes my knee-jerk reaction to situations is to revert right back to my old patterns. And here's the truth. I still have other people in my family who are addicts. Even though my mom and dad have passed and I'm not married to that man anymore, there are still people in my life who are going to be problem drinkers. It's just something that I still have to learn to deal with. The question is, why do I keep going back? If all the people get healthy, 20 years in, I think I'm a healthier person than I used to be. If I left, all the new people wouldn't have the wisdom from me or the people that have been in a long time. As we progress in the program, it's our job to give back to the new people.
Now, it's so interesting because, I know when we were developing this podcast, a lot of this was about acts of service, like giving to the community was a big one. But also, and back to your Monomyth that you had shared about Diane coming in and being your sponsor. Your sponsor, you were her sponsee.
Correct.
And now, would it be fair to say that, her example has inspired you to play that role to someone else who was kind of coming in just like you were when Diane met you?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely want to be able to give back. And I hope that I can help somebody the way that Diane helped me. It's that hope that keeps people going, right?
So when and I know, episode 3, for our listeners, when we have a guest, we always talk about the boons. Is this where you got the whole concept of the boons from?
Well, we do talk about the Al-Anon promises, right? The gifts that you get from working a program. You will find peace and serenity if you keep working on a program. We don't ever promise that your person will ever get sober.
Right.
But if you keep coming back and keep working on yourself, you're going to find peace and serenity, and you're going to learn tools and put tools in your toolbox to deal with life better.
So what are some of your other boons that you've been getting just from you paying it forward, you being a sponsor to others?
I sometimes forget where I came from. 20 years ago was a long time. I'm a very different person, and sometimes I forget. And when I work with new people, it reminds me, it humbles me. It helps me remember that everybody's doing the best that they can, with the tools that they have, and to give people grace that they might be dealing with something that I know nothing about.
That's a beautiful boon, to have that perspective and to have that reminder. And the knowledge that you're making a difference in someone's life in the same way Diane made such a profound difference to you. So for our listeners and for our audience, we have a call to action for you. Our question for you is, have you experienced a moment where you had to let go of something and focus on your own personal healing? Please leave a comment or reach out directly to us at monomythdiaries.com and share your monomyth, and we would love to feature your story on a future episode.
Thank you for joining us on the Monomyth Diaries. If this episode resonates with you or someone you know, we'd love for you to share it and spread the inspiration.
Don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube to stay connected.
We'd appreciate if you could take a moment and rate and review the podcast. It helps us reach more people with stories of transformation and growth.
You can visit us at monomythdiaries.com or text us directly from the show notes to reach out and keep the conversations going.
Until next time, heroes, let's journey together through our monomyths.